again. This is Dr. Laurel Cook, Associate Professor of Marketing at West Virginia University. Today's lectures cover Chapter 13, Situational Influences, Chapter 14, Decision Processes and Problem Recognition, and ending with Chapter 15, Information Search. Again, some material covered in today's lecture is brand new and won't be available in your text. Let's begin with Chapter 13, Situational Influences. The thing to understand here is that situational influences are usually temporary conditions. These conditions affect how consumers behave and are often factors outside a marketer's control. However, situational influences play a persistent role in someone's decision to purchase your brand. As a result, they need to be thoroughly understood by marketers. Such influences include things like physical factors, social factors, time, the reason for a buyer's purchase, and a person's mood. As you may have heard, the Chambers College of Business is working right now on a new building that's estimated to be available for students, faculty, and staff in 2022. Inside this building will be a new social media marketing command center. Imagine how this new building and the social media marketing command center might change a student's perceptions favorably about social media marketing or digital marketing. This new building and the new command center are great examples of situational influence on a student's perceptions or other stakeholders' perceptions. When describing this chapter, a good phrase to understand is "it depends." This phrase, "it depends," is a good description of what situational influences really are. What does "it depends" mean? Well, it usually means that a resolution varies as a result of some sort of external influence, such as a context or a situation. So, what product categories do you imagine are most susceptible to situational influences? As a general category, service-type products that include restaurants, theaters, and so forth seem particularly susceptible to situational influences. Traditional gift items, such as flowers and candy, might also be included. Products designed in part to meet situational needs, such as sports drinks or coffee, may also be susceptible. However, as shown on the screen, necessities are often privately consumed and purchased. These necessities include consumables like toothpaste and consumer packaged food products, and they are less susceptible to situational influence as a class. There are, of course, exceptions to this rule. The image you see on the screen is part of the One Chip Challenge that began in 2017 from this brand. As you may have seen, this year, the brand returned the challenge, and we even had many of these chips available in our own local Morgantown Kroger store. You may have seen common TikTok videos, for example, talking about similar products. The example you see on the screen, Little Nitro World's Hottest Gummy Bear, is another example. Why do you think situational influences would be particularly relevant for these products? Well, if you consider when these products are consumed, you would understand that rarely would anyone buy these products to consume in private. If you're going to eat the world's hottest gummy bear, you're much more likely to eat it in front of other people.
So I went to 7-Eleven and they have this little gummy bear thing that apparently is the world's hottest gummy bear. It is 9 million times hotter than a jalapeno. It comes out in this little packaging. So this is it. How can a gummy bear be spicy?
Take a look at how one advertising agency that represents the state of California illustrated the importance of situational influences for workplace safety. Again, marketing is at work to help illustrate the importance of situational influence in a human resources context.
I'm the sous chef here. With any luck, I should be head chef by next year. I've got this amazing fiancé, who I won't be marrying this weekend, because I'm about to be in a terrible accident. But really, I should have cleaned up the grease over there, and they should never put the deep fryer so close.
Somebody help me!
Now, let's imagine how important social influences are for behavioral change. A good way to understand this idea is to consider how your behavior might change as a function of your location. Your behavior in Morgantown or in your hometown is likely to be a lot different than it would be if you took a trip to Las Vegas, for example. It's important to understand that situational influence is everything that it might affect a consumer's purchase decision, except, number one, the consumer, and number two, the stimulus. The stimulus in this case is usually the product or maybe an ad. There is an exception to this rule. The exception is the temporary state of a consumer. Now, consumer behavior occurs in 4 types of situations. The first type, as represented by the image on the screen, is the communication situation. The communication situation is the context in which consumers receive information. For example, in a funeral, consumers are very vulnerable, and that vulnerability affects their ability to process information. Indeed, this is a perfect opportunity for social marketers to enter this situation. I have a good colleague named Stephen Kopp, who is a researcher at the University of Arkansas, who researched the death care industry and recognized that this industry took advantage in many cases of vulnerable consumers. This was a perfect situation of the communications situation, where consumers in this case weren't in a great situation to be able to receive information and process that information fully. As a result, they often made decisions that weren't financially wise, purchasing a more expensive casket, for example, or an extra flower package. This particular industry makes about $25 billion per year, so you can understand why this would be very important for social marketers to uncover ways to help protect consumers in this particular context. So the implication here is about information processing. In this particular communication situation, consumers' ability to process information fully is reduced, making them more vulnerable. The second situation is a purchase situation. This is the situation or context in which a purchase is made. For example, in a grocery store, the product purchase may vary for mom when she either has her children with her or when she shops by herself. Remember, what are you likely to buy as you travel down the cereal aisle if you have pester power at work? Again, the implication here is the effect of other people. Imagine how much on average you spend in a physical location when you're shopping alone versus when you're shopping with other people. The third is the usage situation. Do you think Timex can survive in a time when consumers rely more and more on their phones to tell time? In other words, is the watch dead? Is there something the brain can do that might have some relevance to the usage situation? And the answer to that question is yes. There might be cases that a consumer would need to be able to tell the time, and pulling out a phone is not tenable. This is just a very simple example to illustrate how one brand is trying to reframe the usage situation to improve the relevance for the products it sells. The implication here is an improved product lifecycle. So as technology changes, clever and savvy brands might realize, aha, let's consider how to change the usage situation. Another example of the usage situation is the type of drink you might consume as a function of the day of the week. On Monday, maybe you're consuming a lot of water, but of course on Friday and the weekend, the healthfulness of the beverages you consume probably changes a lot. The last situation is disposition situation. This is the situation in which a purchase is disposed of. And what do you think the example on the screen illustrates, and why might it be very exciting, especially for social marketers? Well, the example you see on the screen is the phenomena of upcycling. So, upcycling is a reuse of discarded objects or materials in such a way as to create a brand new product, often of higher quality or value than the original. The implication here is, of course, the pro-social behaviors, including recycling behaviors. Here's a good example of one brand leveraging the disposition situation. I thought it was very clever when Samsung earlier this year decided to use their TV packaging in a way where the consumer would have their TV but could also use the TV box to create a cool little cat condo for their pet. Situations can be described on a number of dimensions which determine their influence on a consumer's behavior. There are 5 different dimensions. The first is physical surroundings. For example, the brand shown on the screen, this particular brand is a master at atmospherics. So their retail locations are known for their smell, their location, their ambient dark lighting, etc. They really leverage this particular dimension of situational influences. This particular dimension has a lot of relevance for some local restaurants too. For example, how many of you have been to Stefano's, an Italian restaurant here in Morgantown? You might imagine a first-timer's surprise when they visit this restaurant. It's very classy inside, very nice, a little bit more expensive than your average Italian restaurant, but it's placed underneath a bowling alley. So how do you think a consumer might feel when they're spending a lot more money on an Italian meal and they hear bowling balls thumping on the floor above them? As we talk about this first dimension of physical surroundings, the role of music is important. It's imperative for marketing students to understand. Rarely do you go to a retail location or a restaurant or have some sort of experiential concert activity, for example, without music being heavily involved. But what I need you as marketing students to understand is there's a big difference about the power of music on a person's mood and their emotion. So let's discuss some of those differences. Mood is something a person may not express. You just feel angry or feel depressed or feel happy and joyful, but maybe you don't express it, you just feel that way. Mood may last for a long period, whereas emotions usually last only for the time being. Emotions are chemicals released in response to our interpretation of a specific trigger. So if someone slaps you in the face, you can have a very specific emotion to that trigger. If someone hugs you, you're going to have a very specific emotional response to that event. Mood is heavily influenced by our environment. For example, the weather, the lighting, color, people around us, by our physiology. For example, what we've been eating, how we've been exercising, if we have a cold or not, how well we slept, and by our thinking, where we're focusing our attention, and also by our current emotions. So mood is influenced by all of this. Now, emotions can turn into moods when you lose focus on the event or the object that started that feeling is lost. So the second dimension, social surroundings, is illustrated by the image on the screen. The same woman here is shown wearing 2 different outfits. On the left, she's wearing an outfit that's appropriate for the task at hand and where she's going to be seen. Something more casual, she's probably not going to be seen by her coworkers, for example, but on the right, of course, she's going to be dressed much differently. As we've discussed before, the second dimension, social surroundings, can have some very interesting and odd implications for consumer behavior. What do you think the person in the image is doing? And how do you think her consumption behavior might change? Well, as you can see on the screen, she's probably trying to purchase a private consumable product. If she's seen by somebody, especially if she's seen by somebody she knows, what is she likely to do? In many of these cases, consumers in this situation are likely to abandon the product purchase. Of course, this means bad news for the brand or the retailer. Another example we've talked about before is, of course, the butt brush effect. So in a retail situation, if someone makes physical contact with you, again, how do you think that particular effect will influence your behavior? What researchers have uncovered is due to the butt brush effect, the shopper in the situation would usually move out of the crowded area and once again abandon the search for that particular product. The third dimension is temporal perspective. As time decreases, the amount of information searched for by the consumer also decreases, and perceptions of retailer service quality go down as well. So if you have to buy something quickly, the amount of homework you might do to price compare or to find other alternatives goes down, and your perception of that retailer or brand also goes down. The fourth dimension is task definition. In other words, this is the reason that consumption is occurring. So think of a gift you're buying somebody. If you're buying a wedding gift, that particular task is a lot different, and so you might buy something that's very pragmatic, like a toaster. But if you're buying a birthday present, well, again, the task is different, so you might buy a product that is a lot more fun or personalized. The fifth dimension include antecedent states. These are features of the consumer that are not long-lasting states. In other words, these are transient feelings that are generally not tied to a specific event or object. They tend to be less intense than emotions and may operate without a person's awareness. And they don't generally interrupt behavior like emotions might. This dimension, antecedent states, plays a big role in some of the research I've conducted. For example, why a person might use payday loans. For years, many of my other fellow marketers and economists assumed that someone would use a payday loan because maybe their education is low or they came from a poor background. Factors maybe outside of the control of the consumer. In fact, previous studies actually suggest that socioeconomic status leads to a cycle of debt, someone using payday loans, for example, over and over. But the good news is, in my research, I actually uncovered what's called a scarcity effect. So, for example, someone who is poor today versus someone who is always poor, they make many different decisions, especially in the context of buying a payday loan. My research uncovered this triple scarcity effect, where the effect of not having cash can actually cause consumers to feel a sense of scarcity, not having enough. And it's that particular factor that causes consumers to overborrow, regardless of their socioeconomic status. A marketing strategist can use the information in this chapter to scale products based on the situation. They can identify different situations that might involve the consumption of a product. So a marketing strategist, which might include a brand manager, for example, can determine which products or brands are most likely to be purchased or consumed across a variety of situations. And your textbook actually provides a great example of this. On page 487, you see this figure, and you can see how brands that represent these particular products, that include sodas or toothpaste, mouthwash, gum, how they might be positioned by the brand manager based on the use situation. For example, when a consumer is cleaning their mouth or before an important business meeting. You can see how they might position these products based on that particular usage situation. Chapter 14 discusses decision-making processes and problem recognition. Decision-making for consumers becomes more extensive and complex as a function of purchase involvement. The lowest level of purchase involvement is represented by nominal decisions, and we'll cover this in more detail in just a minute. A problem is recognized, long-term memory provides a single preferred brand, that brand is purchased, and only limited post-purchase evaluation occurs, again, under nominal decision-making. As a consumer moves from limited decision-making towards extended decision-making, information search increases, alternative evaluation becomes more extensive and complex, and post-purchase evaluation becomes more thorough. Remember the figure that I said describes our entire semester. This is the chapter where we're finally, again, moving from chapter 13 in situations now into a consumer recognizing a problem and searching for information to satisfy that problem. This figure in your text is one I'd like you to pay careful attention to. You can see that these decisions, either for nominal, limited, or extended decision making, are a function of purchase involvement. Again, purchase involvement is on a continuum from low levels or no levels of purchase involvement to high levels of purchase involvement. Remember, purchase involvement is a temporary state that's influenced by the interaction of a consumer, a product, and situational characteristics. The consumer decision-making process will help us understand three things as a marketer: emotion, situation, and attribute-based decisions. Let's begin with nominal decision-making. Remember, there's an important role of purchase involvement here. Purchase involvement is a level of interest in the purchase process. This factor of purchase involvement is not to be confused with product involvement. Let me give you an example to help you understand the differences between purchase and product involvement. Let's say you're studying for finals. You realize that you're going to have to hunker down for a while and study for a number of hours. Since you have to study for your next exam, you want to purchase a cup of coffee and settle down in front of your computer. In this example, how can purchase involvement differ from product involvement? Well, purchase involvement can be low because maybe you stop at the nearest coffee shop and just grab any cup of coffee quickly. However, your product involvement might be high because Starbucks, in this example, is maybe your favorite brand, and normally you prefer to buy that brand. So you can see how your product involvement with the Starbucks coffee brand is high, but your purchase involvement is low because you're buying a cup of coffee just quickly and at the nearest shop. You're not really extending a lot of effort to search for a Starbucks location, in other words. With nominal decision-making, this is also known as habitual decision-making, an effect involving no decision per se. Nominal decisions occur when there is a very low involvement with the purchase. A completely nominal decision does not even include consideration of the quote-unquote do not purchase alternative. For example, if you're buying soda for a party, you might just go down the soda aisle and purchase your favorite brand because you always purchase that favorite brand. You're not making a decision about which brand to purchase or which soda product to purchase. You might find it interesting to realize that some brands really love it when nominal decision-making occurs, especially if that nominal decision-making is in favor of their brand. As a result, the implications here are shrinking packages and over-packaging. That's why you might see your favorite brand across a number of years be sold at the same price, but maybe you're getting less content. Here's an example of an unintended consequence for nominal decision-making. Imagine going to a movie theater and stopping at the concession stand beforehand to get some popcorn. What do you think the implication here is as it's connected to nominal decision-making? As you might have guessed, there's a big danger zone here. And that's what marketers and behavioral economists describe as mindless consumption, which of course is never good when it comes to unhealthy food products. In this context, most people usually go for a larger size of popcorn. The danger zone implication is that we, as humans, mindlessly eat when we consume in this situation. As you can imagine, we're watching a movie, and portion control does not come to mind. These sorts of decisions can be thought of much like a habit. Habitual consumption also has implications for the form of entertainment we use. In a lot of the nominal decisions that are made to use Netflix above other streaming services, what device do you think a lot of these habitual decisions usually occur on across the world? It might surprise you to know that for India, South Korea, and Japan, most consumption in this context is made on a phone. For those of us here in the U.S., South America, and Australia, many of us stream on an actual TV. And for those in Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, a mobile tablet is usually used. Let's transition now to limited decision making. Consider the example where you have to make a flight. Hopefully many of you are aware of flights.google.com. This particular website is very useful for an at-a-glance illustration of all the available flights from one location to another on a particular day and at a particular time. Here, this website is a very good illustration of limited decision making. The consumer is able to evaluate a few alternatives, but this particular site does not provide all options. For example, Southwest is missing, and Allegiant flights are also missing. Based on the red dot you see on your screen, we actually have Allegiant flights leaving directly from Morgantown. This is another reason why heuristics become so effective. So many consumers see a green logo or see the words 100% natural, and they use these heuristics in their limited decision making to make inferences about a product being good or bad. So if you see the word natural, hopefully by now you realize this word is not regulated in the US and has no real weight or meaning. Next, we have extended decision making. Again, this is the type of decision making that occurs for high involvement purchases. When I think of high involvement purchases, what comes to mind are usually electronics or some sort of technology, and I think of Best Buy often. The unfortunate effect for Best Buy, though, is what you see on the screen now. Imagine a consumer intends to buy a laptop. In this example, you have the highest level of involvement. And many consumers in this case will go to Best Buy to touch and feel and examine more carefully all the different laptop brands. They decide what they want, and then, what do you know, they end up ordering the product off of Amazon. That's why Best Buy's complaint is that it's considered by consumers to be Amazon's showroom. With extended decision making, the consumer will usually engage in more effortful and thorough evaluation. Think of this as a consumer doing his or her homework. This level of decision making is a response to the high level of purchase involvement. During post-purchase evaluation, doubts are likely, though, and a thorough evaluation takes place. For this reason, marketers realize that under this condition of extended decision-making, you might have another unintended consequence known as buyer's remorse. Buyer's remorse is a phenomenon that consumers who use extended decision-making is much more likely to experience. For example, you might feel this when you buy your first apartment or your first car, an engagement ring, a vacation, for example. So what do you think a brand can do to help consumers deal with this particular outcome? That's right. If you guessed a price match guarantee, you'd be exactly right. In problem recognition, there are active or inactive consumer problems, and marketers have to account for both. For inactive problems, the consumer has a problem and the brand has a solution. So what the marketer is doing in this case is helping the consumer understand that they have a problem. For an active consumer problem, what the marketer really needs to focus in on is positioning their brand as a superior solution. Here's an example of how one brand, UL, made a problem for consumers come to light. The problem UL was facing was an inactive problem. Before they could position UL underwritten products as a solution, they had to make consumers aware of the problem first.
Oh my God, that is insane.
In the event of a fire, who here thinks that you're safer sleeping with the doors open?
All right, as you remember, closed door on the left, open door on the right. And you can see the dramatic difference between the two with the simple closed door.
Impressive. I'll ask you one last time. In the event of a fire, are you safer sleeping with the doors open or the doors closed?
Without a doubt, the door closed. Definitely with the doors closed, and from now on, the doors will be shut at night.
Definitely closed.
Closed.
Definitely closed. And I'm surprised by it.
It's always great to be able to get the message out when we can take our research and get it out into the community to change behavior with the message of close before you doze. It feels great, and hopefully we can save lives.
Following problem recognition, consumers typically engage in some form and amount of search, and that's where Chapter 15 comes in. Information search is internal first and external next, and only if needed. Consider the following example. You need a date for an event, maybe some sort of Greek event or another social event. What process would you use to find available dates first? If you're like most of your peers, you might say, well, I would just ask around. But in that particular response, asking around resembles external search, which is usually for consumers secondary. What you would actually do first is an internal search. So you might think about who you know. I'll use the example of needing to purchase a speaker brand to illustrate the full information search process. Consider this situation where you need to purchase a speaker. What you're going to do is what's illustrated on the screen, and that's an internal search. You're going to try to recall the different speaker brands that you're already familiar with. The type of information consumers are searching for includes 3 different things. The first is the appropriate evaluative criteria for the solution to their problem. In this case, it's the need for a speaker. The second is the existence of various alternative solutions. Again, unless you're extremely brand loyal, you'll try to make a comparison between 2 or more brands. And the third is the performance of each alternative solution on all of your evaluative criterion. If a resolution is not reached through internal search, only at that point does the search process become focused now on relevant external information. Ongoing search is done to acquire information, and because the process is often pleasurable. So if I can't think of a long enough list of speaker brands, I might go online, usually using a search engine like Google. And for the record, if you haven't gone to shopping.google.com, you're missing out. This particular website is great for finding a variety of brands locally and online. So again, in this particular example, I'm thinking of appropriate evaluative criteria. What do I care most about? When I think about the evaluative criteria, I'm also going to consider the existence of various alternatives. In other words, the second type of information I'm searching for. What else is out there? What other brands have I not yet considered? So now I'm going to compare each criteria between the various alternatives to see how they perform. Maybe brand Y is really inexpensive, but brand Z has more features. Let's spend some time here with decision alternatives. For all the brands listed, those circled in red are what's known as the evoked set. The evoked set are brands that are given consideration right away. This is what comes up during internal information search. The brands circled in blue are the inert set. Inert means backup alternatives. For example, I might prefer Yamaha, but I'd consider Bose if needed. The brands circled in black are a marketer's nightmare. They are known as the inept set. Inept is a danger zone for marketers. These are brands a consumer would actively try to stay away from and would never consider. What is the implication then for a new brand that's entered the market? Are they in a consumer's awareness set at all? The answer is no. So you can see why that very first barrier, as I like to tell consumer behavior students, is always to get a consumer's attention. Only then can your new brand be a part of a consumer's awareness set. If a consumer is not aware of your brand at all, they will never be included as an evoked, inert, or inept set. When consumers are searching for information, there are 5 primary sources. The first represents an internal search. And of course, that's your memory. Your memory has a compilation of past searches, personal experiences, and low involvement learning. Each of the sources of information that we're going to go through today are in rank order. So again, a consumer is going to search their memory before they would consider information represented or provided by a marketer. If I tell you as a consumer behavior student that there are 5 primary sources of information, where do you imagine marketing information falls in that order? If you think it's second or third, you'd be mistaken. This figure in your text does a great job of helping students understand the various information sources as a function of either internal or external information. Let's focus just a minute on internal information. You can see that the information is either actively acquired or passively acquired. If some bells are ringing right now, it might be because you remember what we covered in Chapter 9. Passively acquired information might be a function of conditioning. Again, this is low involvement learning. So if a brand has a positive or negative association, that information is recalled by a consumer internally. External information is always actively acquired and covers the remaining sources of information. The second is personal sources. As you might have guessed, if we can't remember a brand or solution to our problem on our own, then we're usually going to use personal sources that include friends, family, and close others. Third is independent sources. Independent sources include magazines, consumer groups, and government agencies. So if I'm comparing healthcare providers, I might go to healthcare.gov to find a good provider before I go to that healthcare provider's website directly. The fourth source of information is marketing sources. So here is where a marketer might provide information on their website, might provide information through their sales personnel, or other advertising. The last source of information is experiential. And experiential sources include inspection or product trial. This provides a very direct source of information, allowing consumers to try a product directly. When we talk about experiential sources, I like to bring up an acting analogy known as the fourth wall. Sometimes actors try to break the fourth wall and will often talk to the audience directly. The fourth wall, in other words, is a performance convention in which an invisible imagined wall separates actors from the audience. Do you see then how product demonstration is analogous to breaking that fourth wall? So out of the 5 sources of information, 4 are external. So where do consumers these days go for external information search? Where are the information sources? Naturally, the focus of our conversation shifts now to online. So let's examine internet users and how they've been distributed across the world. You can see here, this is a recent screen capture of internet users across the world. And what I'd like you to focus in on is this number here for Asia, 51.8%. I've recorded these numbers since 2017, and the percent of online internet users for Asia continues to increase every single year. Here it is this time last year, in 2018, and again in 2017, when it was 49.7%. Here's another way of looking at this information. You can see that across the world, Asia represents 51.8%. What I've noticed is that most marketing students here in the U.S. assume that most internet users are in North America. You can see based on this information, that's simply not true. Only 6.8% are represented by North America. The implication here in the marketing key is to consider where your information is disseminated. What do you imagine this particular infographic represents for you as a marketer? If you're selling a brand, and your brand is international, and your brand isn't limited to sales just in the U.S., then you can see how you might benefit from having your information available to Asian consumers, for example. Here's another Internet Live Stats website I enjoy looking at to compare the total number of users. You can see why BRIC countries, represented by Brazil, Russia, India, and China, are heavily sought after by those in the business community. However, it's not enough simply to live in an Internet Search 1.0 world, and this is where my role as a digital marketer comes into play. I'd like you as a consumer behavior student to consider other ways to go beyond simply generic information search on your websites. We're in a Web 3.0 world right now. In other words, it's known as the semantic web, and is regarded as an integrator across different content, information applications, and systems. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. Here's an easy one. Google. Google, of course, is the largest search engine in the world, and they use semantic meaning to help consumers populate search terms. This is just a funny example. When I type in college students are, this is a screen capture from the semantic results as of today. On the screen now is a brand's illustration of a Web 3.0 information search approach. You can see how BMW is using the build your own car feature. The marketing key here is to have your information create a personalized experience. For the marketing strategist, there are three main considerations and questions you need to ask. The first is, how can marketers drive information to their consumers? Naturally, what follows is question number 2. How can marketers drive consumers to their information? And what we'll cover in a later chapter is number 3. How can online selling be utilized or integrated with existing channels? To illustrate question number 1, how do we drive information to consumers? One way is through the use of online ads, which as of today represents about a $55 billion industry. The example you see on the screen, though, is pretty clever and relatively newer, and is known as native advertising. This is marketing information that doesn't look like a typical ad. Number 2 is how we drive consumers to our information. Think of these two questions as a push versus a pull strategy, where number 2 is that pulling your consumer to you. So Nike is a brand I like to use as an exemplar here. They have a wonderful website where you can shop for the Nike products. You can see how Nike uses their website not only to promote products that they sell, but to drive consumers to their website for other reasons, perhaps to use their app or to connect with other consumers. This chapter closes with a discussion of online behavioral advertising. And all you need to know at this point is what they, maybe good or bad marketers, when they're using online behavioral advertising, what kind of information do marketers in this case gain about the consumer? And there are 3 takeaways here. But we're going to end with a cautionary tale. Here's an example of some recent research that focuses on a vulnerable group of consumers, primarily children. And this particular article looked at 135 different apps that are used by children. And as many as 95% of those apps contain at least one type of advertising. In this particular research, the authors found very high rates of mobile advertising through manipulation and disruption.